Hello everyone, I hope you're having a good day so far. I'm making this video to be able to answer several questions that you posed to me after our little interview section at Drexel the other week. So what I'm going to do is go through each of these. I believe we have 4 questions here, and be able to give you my responses here in real time. The first question that was asked is, for older applicants, what about questions that hint at an age difference, life experience, or a previous career? As someone who himself initially planned on being first a child psychologist in general practice, and then a criminal defense attorney, and then ended up here in the field of forensic mental health, I can definitely appreciate the issue of going through multiple phases in life, multiple careers, so on and so forth. And if you are in this position, then the first thing I want to do is to commend you on following that passion and following your heart to be able to be in this section, in this field. I know it's not an easy thing to transition, and I'm sure that you have come up against a number of obstacles, particularly in terms of these kinds of questions, of people asking you sometimes, what do you think you're doing? And just having to really just follow your heart, and I have a great deal of respect for you and for that life decision. In terms of answering a question like this, I'm a big believer in humor, particularly self-deprecating humor. So if someone hints at a large age difference, for example, let's say that you've gotten into a clinical psych program and you're in your 50s, and you've finished and you're going in for an internship, and you walk into the room. I have a colleague where this happened to him. He walked into the room and someone said, oh, doctor, I think you're lost. They thought he was a doctor already in the hospital, in a different ward, in a different unit. And of course, he was there to apply for the internship to be able to have his formal interview for that. So I'm a big believer in using self-deprecating humor at a time like that. At the end of the day, the key thing here is humility. You're someone who clearly, if you are coming to this later in life, who does have a great deal more experience. And the key thing is going to be able to show how you take that experience you have, even if it's in a field that's very different. Let's say you've been in computer science for several decades. Now you're coming at this field. How is that going to inform your clinical decision making? How is that going to inform your research in a way that's very unique and that other people simply do not have? So for example, let's say that you're in computer science as your background. You may say something like you're very comfortable with coding, and that you think that something unique that you can bring to a research setting, for instance, would be the use of open source softwares, for example, software packages for statistics, things like R, Stata, so on and so forth, to actually develop custom modules for different kinds of statistical analysis that are going to be important to your colleagues who you'll be working with in the research setting. Something like that would be an invaluable skill. Let's say it's something completely different. Let's say it's something like art history, for example. You're coming at it from that perspective. Maybe you were assistant curator at a museum for a long time. If that's the case, you're going to want to make sure that whenever you're discussing these sorts of issues, that you again bring that creative element into it. You're somebody who I like to think outside of the box quite a bit, and I think that that's something that's going to serve me very well. Also, my background in art history will be something that will help me to be able to connect with patients in a way that maybe other people can't. Art can be a very therapeutic thing, and I think that by bringing that into the clinical setting, it could be something that we could see a lot of benefits from. I'm interested in starting up an art therapy group. For instance, there's all sorts of ways. The key is to be creative. Be creative and establish that goodness of fit. That's what you want to do. The second question here is, please describe a case where things went wrong. What did you do? Things have gone wrong for me so many times I can't even count them. Typically what happens is you look back, you look at someone's CV, you talk to someone, and they seem like they got a job that maybe you want to be in, and you think, oh, it must have been really simple, really straightforward. I can guarantee you, at least from my perspective, for every single success, there's been at least 99 failures along the way. And I'm a big believer in that quote of fail fast and fail often. That's a good way to be able to get ahead. Definitely learn from your failures. So in terms of an example for me where things went wrong, I remember doing an interview where the interviewer, I called him the wrong name the entire time without even realizing. I was extremely nervous, and I didn't realize that when the gentleman kind of came into the room and kind of shook my hand, that this was someone completely different than who I was expecting to interview me. And so I had prepared for this first gentleman, and in the end I was interviewed by the second fellow. So I won't say the names, but they definitely know who they are, because the entire time I was calling them by a different name. I'm a big believer in admitting your mistakes. Sometimes you can get around some of these issues, but sometimes it's good to just come clean, and that's what I had to end up doing. I said at the very end of the interview, because whenever I would call him this name, he would kind of have this strange look in his eye, like, what are you talking about? And then I realized, looking at him for a moment, that this, he had a similar look, but this was definitely not the person I was expecting to talk to. It was very embarrassing, as you can imagine. And in the end, I just had to come clean and say, sir, I need to apologize. I think that I was expecting to be interviewed by someone else, and so because of that, I'm dreadfully sorry that I think I've been calling you the wrong name for this entire interview. And that's all you can do sometimes. When it comes to these situations, though, always remember, like we talked about last week, they're not going to remember what you said, they're not going to remember what you did, they're going to remember how you made them feel. So simply having a smile on your face, being a jovial, gregarious person, but very professional at the same time, is what you want to get across. So if it's something where you make one of these social faux pas in any way, shape, or form, don't think that you're automatically, dead in the water. It's certainly the case where I'm a big believer you can always bounce back from these things. Simple things, thank you note, particularly a handwritten thank you note if you're close enough that they'll get it within a couple of days of the interview. Don't send an email the second you get out of that interview. That comes across a little strange. But possibly the next day, just saying, I really appreciate your time. I know it's very valuable, and it will be a sincere pleasure to be able to keep in touch, regardless of the outcome of this process. Build those bridges. They'll serve you well. The third is, how do you utilize supervision? What did you learn? How would you do things differently if you could? Okay, in terms of the kind of supervision here, I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about. I'm assuming this is a graduate school question about graduate supervision. So I'll tell you a bit about how I do supervision and then how supervision was done for me. I was at Oxford, and the system of supervision there is, it's a very independent one. The idea is that they wish, they being the powers that be, the administrators, and the professors who are your supervisors, really want you to grow quite a bit, and they don't want to give you too much guidance, too much advice. They're going to put you on the right path, and they're going to let you go down that path yourself. If you make failures on that path, that's not a bad thing. And that's a big thing that I learned through my supervision at Oxford, was how to make kind of strategic failures, and also how to use those failures to my advantage then in the future. So that is how supervision worked for me. The way that I used that, initially, it was frustrating insofar as I assumed that, similar to, for example, a North American model, there would be more hand-holding relative to the system that I found in the UK. In time, I grew to be greatly fond, though, of this UK process, insofar as it provided me a great deal more independence. After I finished my degree, I didn't have the feeling that, I didn't know how to go through every single step of that publication process, of that grant funding process, of that IRB process, because I was expected, with minimal hand-holding, to do that on my own in the first place, and that was a tremendous blessing to me. So my supervisor, who I still have a very fond relationship with now, was someone whose field was a bit different than mine, insofar as his focus was more on epidemiology as opposed to risk assessment. My focus was on risk assessment with only a bit on epidemiology. And I found that we ended up having a fantastic relationship in one way, insofar as I would learn a tremendous amount from him. He would give me a few pieces of information to go and hunt down. I would learn a great deal about this, would kind of come back to him. So we ended up having this wonderful synergistic relationship that continues to this day. In terms of how I do supervision, the most important thing for me always is to be able to have someone who is mentorable, someone who is malleable insofar as they want to be trained. This is a critical property for me at least, and of course this is entirely subjective. People will have different wants in terms of people that they take on or people that they want to work with. All I can tell you is from my perspective. My perspective is always one where if you have someone who's going to be working with you, who you're going to be seeing more frequently than your family because you're at work, 8, 9 hours a day, you want to make sure that this is someone who you're going to enjoy working with. For me, people that I enjoy working with are, very humble, very kind for the sake of being kind. They're smiling constantly. They're optimistic and positive. They want to work with other people. They're team players. So that's what I'm looking for. You go to different places. I know that I've had some bosses, some folks that I've worked for clinically in the past. When I was an undergraduate, I did a clinical internship, and my boss back then was someone who did not want that, did not want a personal relationship. Was interested in go to work, do your work. There's no need for anything beyond that. And when you leave at the end of the day, don't think about work whatsoever. So it's really going to be this issue of, like we said the other day in German, Geschmackssache. It's personal preference. And that'll depend on your supervisor. That will depend on your geographic location. Different cultures are going to have exceptionally different cultural expectations when it comes to education. So if you're thinking about studying outside of the country, make sure that you really look into that before you decide whether or not to accept an admittance into a given program. Last but not least, what is the appropriateness of asking about conflict resolution at a site? It's a good question. I think that's a very important issue. Always remember that just as if someone asks you a question that may on the surface seem inappropriate. For example, somebody asks, so tell me about your family. Are you planning on starting a family soon? Remember what we talked about is, even though that's what they're asking at this level, they're actually asking you something deeper underneath. This is the same issue here. If I were to, from my perception, if I were to have someone ask me this question of what is the tell me about conflict resolution in the department, the two things that I would read into that superficial situation down here is, number one, I would think about, why do they want to know this? Are they expecting that they're going to have some kind of conflict with someone else? Have they had issues with conflicts in the past? Probably if I, talk to their references, I'm going to ask about, did they have any problems in the department or something? They asked us about conflict resolution, and I wasn't sure why. The second piece here is if you ask about conflict resolution, they may kind of be primed in terms of the next questions they ask to ask them in a very specific way. In the end, it's something where, particularly if you ask this towards the beginning or towards the end, remember primacy and recency effect. These are the things that they're going to remember. So if you're going to ask a question like that, ask it at the appropriate time and ask it in the appropriate context. I wouldn't even use a term like conflict management or conflict resolution. I would say, I've been talking to some of my colleagues at some other universities, and one big question that they always ask is about conflict resolution, or is about how to deal with problems and all. What are kind of the mechanisms of dealing with that in the department? So I would, kind of say that somebody else, brought this to your mind, as opposed to you just want to ask on your own behalf for the reasons that I stated before. In the end, it's all about impression management here, right? That's kind of the key thing. So I wish you the best of luck. You can always reach me at my email address, which is jaysingh@giferinc, which is gifrinc.com. I highly recommend that you check out the journal Archives of Forensic Psychology, which just launched this past year with an amazing editorial board, folks like John Monahan, Beth Loftus, Kirk Heilbrunn. We've got a great batch, and we're really, really looking forward to welcoming graduate student papers. Something unique about our journal is that we also welcome negative findings, so non-significant findings. So if the methodology is very high quality, but you don't have any significant findings, we want that manuscript because it deserves to be part of the scientific conversation. And you can write to me directly about that, or you can check out our website, which is www.archivesofforensic psychology.com. Thank you so much, and I wish you a great day.